Okay, so this is my day 4 on 100 days of silence, and I'm going through the responsive web design certification through the freeCodeCamp. And today I'm going to be starting to build this set of colored markers. So let's see how far can I get with this project. Let's start coding. As you have seen in the previous projects, web pages should start with a doctype HTML declaration followed by an HTML element. Okay, so then let's add a doctype declaration. Doctype HTML. I'm going to need an exclamation mark in there. Then I'm going to have a HTML tag, and this HTML will have this language attribute, and the value is going to be English. Yeah, so let's go to the next challenge. Now let's nest a head element inside the HTML, and also let's just below the head element let's add a body element. Oh yeah, I need to close the body. Okay, so title element displays the content of the title in two more ways. In the title bar when the page is open, in the browser tab for the page when you hover on it, even if that tab is not active. Once you hover on the tab, the title text is displayed. Okay, so what it's talking about is this thing. So if I were to open another tab here, and then if I were to hover in here, then yeah, so this is the title that's showing. So title goes inside head, and the title's value is going to be colored markers, and that's good. Let's go to the next challenge. Yeah, let's tell the browser how to encode characters on our page. So it's going to have character set of UTF-8, and meta is self-closing. You can have multiple self-closing meta elements. Okay, so let's add another meta, and what we are going to do is the name attribute is going to be viewport, and content attribute is going to be width is equals to device width, and comma initial scale is 1.0. yeah, okay, now we are ready to start adding contents. So let's add a header h1 and css color markers. In this project you will work with an external CSS file. Okay, so let's go on and link that external CSS file. We are going to do link, and rel will be style set the relation, then href attribute is going to be styles.css. yeah, Okay, now that your external CSS file is set up, you can start styling the page. Create a new CSS rule that targets h1 element and set the text align property to center. Let's align the h1 to center, and this is working now. This moves the h1 elements to the center. Now you will add some elements that you will eventually style into color markers. Okay, first within the body element add a div and set its class attribute to container. Okay, so inside body we have to add a div and we have to give it a class name of container. Make sure the div element is below h1. Yeah, it is below h1. Next, within the div element add another div element and give it a class of marker. Okay, so let's go on, and actually I can copy this. And instead of container we should give marker class. Okay, it's time to add some color to the marker. Okay, right now the div is not visible because it's empty. Remember that one way to add color to an element is to use the color keyword. Okay, like black, cyan, yellow. As a reminder, here's how to target the class freeCodeCamp. Okay, let's add a background color and set the property to red. So we are supposed to target the marker class and then add background color and set it to red. Yeah, nothing is displayed here because the div basically is invisible. It does not have any height or any width because it doesn't have any content inside in it. The background color was applied, but since the marker div has no content in it, yeah, it doesn't have any height by default. Yeah, so let's go on and give a height property, height and width also. Height is going to be 25 pixels and width is going to be, is that how we spell width? No, it's ts, 200 pixels. Yeah, so now we can see our marker div. Your marker would look better if it was centered on the page. Okay, so let's set margin left and margin right to auto. If we set margin, not margin but margin left to auto, margin right to auto, then it's going to center our div. But the exercise wants us to set all of these properties in a single line, so let's go on and use this shorthand. So if I do margin auto, then it sets all four sides, top, right, bottom, left, all of those sides to auto. So this centers the div. Now that you have got one marker centered with color, it's time to add other markers. Okay, in the container div add two more divs. So we are going to have two more markers. Yeah, so let's go to the next challenge. So there are three separate divs in here stacked on top of each other. Okay, so it wants us to 10 pixels and auto. Okay, now what this is going to do is set the margin of 10 pixels on top and bottom, and for the left and right it's going to set the property to auto. To give the markers different colors, you will need to add a unique class to each one. Multiple classes can be added to an element by listing them. Okay, so to begin, add the class 1 to the first marker element. So what we can do is basically after a space we can just add another class name. So this is how we add multiple classes to a div or to any element. Remove the background color property and its value. Okay, let's remove that. New CSS rule that targets the class 1 and set its background. Okay, so now only the first marker will have the background color of red. Sorry. Okay, let's go on and add class 2 and class 3 to these divs. Okay, oh, it's not there, it's 3. Okay, so let's add a CSS rule for 2, and this is going to have the background color of green, and 2 is going to have the background color of green, and 3 is going to have the background color of blue. Yeah, so we have our markers green, red and blue. There are two main color models: the additive RGB red, green, blue model used in electronic devices, and the subtractive CMYK model used in print. In this project you will work with RGB model. This means that colors begin is black and change is different levels of red, green and blue are introduced. An easy way to see this is with the RGB function. Create a new CSS rule that targets the class container and set its background color to black with RGB 000. Okay, so let's go on and make our container element to have background color of black. So 0 0 0, and our container has a black background now. A function is a piece of code that can take an input and perform a specific action. The CSS RGB function accepts values or arguments for red, green and blue and produces a color. Each red, green and blue value is a number from 0 to 255. 0 means that there is 0% of that color and is black. 255 means that there is 100% of that color. Okay, so in the dot o in the one class rule, replace the color keyword RGB with the RGB function. Okay, let's replace this with RGB. For the RGB function, set the value for red to 255, so it's R, G and B. So R is for red, so the first parameter is for red, second for green and third for blue. And now we have 100% red and no green and no blue, which is basically red in color. So this is red now. Okay, let's set background color for 2 to green. So let's use RGB and let's do 200. Oh no, we don't want any red, we want green and no blue, and 0 0 255, and this is going to be blue in color. Yeah, Yeah, so yeah, actually the green color here with RGB value is not exactly the same as using this green value in here. So if I were to use, instead of this, if I were to use green, then it would look different. So here it explains that the green color keyword is actually a darker shade and is halfway between black and maximum value for green. So in the to class CSS rule, set the green value in the RGB function to 127 to lower its intensity. So this is very bright, so I think what it wants is, yeah, so to lower the intensity of green. Now add a little more vertical space between your markers and the edge of the container. So maybe we are going to use some padding in the container. Padding is going to be 10 pixels, which should give some spacing in here. And okay, so only add 10 pixels for top and bottom and set left and right padding to 0. Okay, so I think what it wants us to do is for top and bottom we are going to add 10 pixels, and for left and right we are going to add 0 pixels. So we are not going to add anything here. In the additive RGB color model, primary colors are colors that, when combined, create pure white. Blue for this reason, but for this to happen, each color needs to be at its highest intensity. Before you combine colors, set your green marker back to pure green. For the RGB function in the .to CSS rule, set the green. Okay, so it wants us to set the green to this value. Yeah. Now that you have the primary RGB, it's time to combine them. Okay, for the RGB function of container, okay, let's set these values to maximum, which is going to give us the white background. Yeah, so the background is white now. Secondary colors are the colors you get when you combine primary colors. Okay, to create the first secondary color, yellow, the RGB function in 1, to create the first secondary color, yellow, update the RGB function in .1 CSS rule to combine pure red and pure green. Okay, so let's this is pure red right now. If I add pure green, then it's going to convert to pure yellow color. Or I don't know if yellow is pure because it's secondary. To create the next secondary color, cyan. I don't know how to pronounce this. Cyan. Pronunciation. Cyan. Okay. Seems like that. Yeah, cyan. To create the next secondary color, update the RGB function in .2 to have pure green and pure blue. Okay, so pure green and pure blue will result in this color, cyan. To create the final secondary color, magenta, how is it pronounced? Magenta. Okay. To create the final secondary color, magenta, update the RGB function in the .3 CSS rule to combine pure blue and pure red. Okay, blue and red. So let's combine blue and red. Yeah, that's our fancy magenta color. Now that you are familiar with secondary colors, you will learn how to create tertiary colors. Tertiary colors are created by combining a primary color with a nearby secondary color. To create it, okay, so combining primary color with a nearby secondary color, okay. To create the tertiary color orange, update the RGB function in .1 CSS rule so that red is at the max value and set green to 127. So red is at its max. Okay, so now that's orange. Now let's create, what color is this? Spring green. Okay, green is at its max and blue is going to have 127. So this is spring green. Now we are going to create violet. So blue is at max and red is going to have 127, and that's going to be the violet color. Oh my god, there are more colors and I don't know how to pronounce this. Oh, I know this one. This is azure and rose. Okay, let's try to combine these values so that we can produce these colors. To create this chartreuse, what the hell is this? Char, it's not char. Chartreuse, okay, chartreuse green. Update the RGB function in the 1 CSS rule so that red is 127 and set green to max value. So red is 127 and green is 255. Okay, so 50% red and 100% green. 50% green and 100% blue. So 50% green and 100% blue. That's called azure. Okay. Now rose color. Blue is 127 and red is going to be 255. So this is rose. Okay. Now that you have gone through all the primary, secondary and tertiary colors on the color wheel, it will be easier to understand other color theory concepts and how they impact design. First, in the CSS rules, .1, 2 and 3 adjust the values in the RGB function so that the background color of each element is set to pure black. Okay, so what I'm going to do is reset these values to 0 and 0. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here and here. Let's submit. Yeah, in the RGB function for .1 CSS, set the red value to max to produce pure red. Green. Okay, so first one is going to be red and second is going to have maximum 100%, sorry, not red, 100% green and 100% blue. First, in the H1 rule, use the RGB function to set its background color to cyan. Okay, so let's go on and background color, and we could have just done this, but I think the test is not going to pass because we have to use RGB function, and it was a mix of green 100% and blue 100%. Okay, next, in .1 CSS rule, use the RGB function to set the background color to black. Okay, let's set this back to black and set this to red. Notice how your eyes are naturally drawn to the red color in the center. When designing a site, you can use this effect to draw attention to important headings, buttons, or links. Okay, so let's set the background color back to black. In H1 CSS rule, remove the background color property. Okay, let's remove. Okay, let's change the class name to red. Yeah, update the .1 CSS rule to target the new. Okay, so we update this selector to target red class. Rule. Okay, and update the RGB function in the .red CSS rule so that the red value is at max. I suppose this wants me to do update the background color. Let's see. Yeah, 2 to green and 3 to blue. So 2 is going to be green, 3 is going to be blue. Update the CSS selector .2 so it targets the new green class. Okay, so this should target the green class and this should target the blue class. Now another is hex values. Okay, so in the green class, what we are going to do is replace this RGB with 00FF00. So this is basically same as RGB 02550. With the hex colors 00, yeah. So let's lower the intensity by giving it 7F. Okay, the HSL color model, or hue, saturation and lightness, is another way to represent colors. Okay, there are so many ways that we could write colors in CSS. So let's write blue in HSL function. So instead of RGB, this is going to be HSL. Now set the hue to 240, saturation to 100%, and lightness to 50%, and we get the blue. Okay, instead of background color, let's just give it background. You have learned a few ways to set flat colors in CSS, but you can also use a color transition or gradient on an element. A gradient is when one color transitions into another. The CSS linear gradient function lets you control the direction of the transition along a line and which colors are used. One thing to remember is that the linear gradient function actually creates an image element and is usually paired with the background property which can accept an image as a value. Okay, so we can use linear gradient, but we have to use background instead of background color. Okay, the linear gradient function is very flexible. Here is the basic syntax. Okay, so the linear gradient function takes in a gradient direction as its first parameter and then multiple colors after it. I have no idea what values can I give to this gradient direction. Okay, so there is this 90 degree. Okay, so it's in degrees. Now you will apply a red to green gradient along a 90 degree line to the first marker. Okay, first in the dot red CSS rule, set the background property to linear gradient. Linear gradient and give the value 90 degree as its direction. Yeah, so there is no color there, and you will use RGB function for colors of this gradient. So let's give it a red color as its argument. So 255 0 and another 0. And why? Okay, nothing happens. Okay, it looks like this function requires at least 2 parameters to have some kind of effect. Let's just try this. Yeah, that's true. What if I were to give it something else? Okay, yeah. You won't see gradient yet because the linear gradient function needs at least 2 color arguments to work. Okay, just figure that out. In the same linear gradient function, use the RGB function to set the second color argument to pure green. RGB, red is going to be 0, green full, and blue is going to be 0. Okay, and it looks like this. Okay, as you can see, the linear gradient function produced a smooth red-green gradient. While the linear gradient function needs a minimum of 2 color arguments to work, it can accept many color arguments. Okay, so let's give it another color, and it's going to be blue this time. Yeah. Color stops allow you to fine-tune where colors are placed along the gradient line. So this is the gradient line, I suppose. They are a length unit like pixel or percentage that follow a color in the linear gradient function. For example, in this red-black gradient, the transition from red to black takes place at 90% point along the gradient line. So red takes up most of the available space. Okay, so in the linear gradient function, add a 75% color stop after the first red color argument. Okay, let's go on and give it 75%. This should be given to the red actually. Yeah, okay, and then this causes this red color to be stressed up to 75% of this div, and the rest of the 25% is covered with green and blue colors. Okay, interesting. Now that you know the basics of how the linear gradient function and color stubs work, you can use them to make the markers look more realistic. Okay, let's set the gradient direction to 180 degrees. Okay, let's see what happens if I do 180. Okay, now 75% of the height is covered with the red color and the rest of the height is covered with the green and blue. Okay, next set the color stuff for red to 0%, for green 50%, and for blue 100%. Okay, 0 green is going to be 50% and the blue is going to be 100%. Okay, go to the next elements. Now that the color stops are set, you will apply different shades of red to each color argument in the linear gradient function. The shades on the top and bottom edges of the marker will be darker, while the one in the middle will be lighter, as if there is a light above it. The first color argument, which is currently pure red, update the RGB function so the value of red is 122. The value for green is 74 and blue is 14. Okay, the shades on the top and bottom edges of the marker will be darker, while the one in the middle will be lighter, as if there is a light above it. Yeah. Oh my god, I'm really bad with colors. I don't know what this looks like. And this does not pass. Let's see what's happening here. For the first color argument, which is currently pure red, update the RGB function so the value for red is 122. Yeah, that's 122. Green is 74. Yes, green is oh, okay. Maybe I was supposed to do this instead of, so I should keep it like this and okay, that's what I was supposed to do. Yeah. Now modify the second color argument in the linear gradient function, which is currently pure green. Update the RGB function so the value for red is 245. So I want to have 245 red, 62 green and 113 blue. Yep, this looks different. I don't know if it looks better or worse, but looks different. Let's update the third one. So 162 value of green is going to be 27 and blue is also going to have a value of 27. Okay, the red marker is looking much more realistic. Now you will do the same for the green marker using a combination of linear gradient. Okay, let's change this. Go here, Now this should be a linear gradient function, linear gradient function with 180 degree of gradient direction, and let's use a hex color with the value of 55, 68 and 0D. Yeah, now let's add second argument so that we can see the div appear be colored in the screen. So 71F53E. Let's add even another color to this gradient. 11 for red, 6C for green and 31 for blue. Even without the color stops, you might have noticed that the colors for the green marker transition at the same points as the red marker. Oh yeah, so it's 0 and 50 and then 100. Okay, the linear gradient function automatically calculates these values for you and places colors evenly along the gradient line by default. Okay, in the .red CSS rule, remove the 3 color stops from the linear gradient function to clean up your code a little bit. Yeah, so if this was the default behavior, then we don't need this anymore. Yeah, cleaned up. Okay, again clean up your code a little more by removing the gradient direction argument from both linear gradient functions. Okay, so we don't need this. Yeah, so this was also the default behavior of the linear gradient function. Now you will apply a gradient to the blue marker. Okay, let's change the background color to background. Now we are going to use HSL values for gradient. Okay, so let's just got this linear gradient and then let's just give it the value 186 and 76% and 16%. 76 and 16%. Okay, let's add a second color argument where the value is going to be 233, 90% and 60%. Oh, it was supposed to do 23, not 33. And as the third color argument, pass in the HSL function and 240, 56 and 42. So 240, 56% of saturation and 42% of light. Yes. Now that the markers have the correct colors, it's time to build the marker sleeves. Start with the red marker. Inside the red marker div element, create a new div element and give it a class sleeve. Okay, let's create a new div with a class name of sleeve. Create a new CSS rule that targets the class sleeve. Set the width property to 110 pixels and height property to 25 pixels. Okay, so let's target the sleeve class and let's create a rule. Width is going to be 110 pixels and height is going to be 25 pixels. And just to make sure that this sleeve is there, we can do this, and then we can see this appear in here. Yep. To make the marker look more realistic, give the sleeve a transparent white color. Okay, so let's go on and give it a background color of white. Yeah, so the sleeve is somewhere in here. Okay, opacity describes how opaque or non-transparent something is. For example, a solid wall is opaque and no light can pass through, but a drinking glass is much more transparent and you can see through the glass to the other side. With the CSS opacity property, you can control how opaque or transparent an element is. With the value 0 or 0%, the element will be completely transparent. Or at 1.0 or 100%, the element will be completely opaque like it is by default. So let's go on and set opacity for this sleeve to be 0.5. Another way to set the opacity for an element is with the alpha channel. Similar to the opacity property, the alpha channel controls how transparent or opaque a color is. You have already set sleeves opacity with a named color and the opacity property, but you can add an alpha channel to the other CSS color properties. Okay, so right now we have to remove this opacity, and then in the next exercise maybe we are going to set the alpha channel. Okay, instead of RGB we are going to use RGB and A, and this A is for alpha channel. Let's use the RGBA function and let's give it white color with 0.5 opacity. So this is what, yeah, your sleeve is looking good, but it would look even better if it was positioned more toward the right side of the marker. One way to do that is to add another element before the sleeve to push it to the right. Okay, so let's add a new cap, a div with the class name of cap, placed before the sleeve. Yeah. Create a new CSS rule to target the class cap. In the new rule, set the width property. Okay, let's target the cap class. Let's give it a width of 60 pixels and height of 25 pixels. And I should be able to spell width correctly. Looks like your sleeve disappeared, but don't worry, it's still there. What happened is that your new cap div is taking up the entire width of the marker and is pushing the sleeve down to the next line. This is because the default display property for div elements is block. So when the two block elements are next to each other, they stack like actual blocks. For example, your marker elements are all stacked on top of each other. Yeah. To position two div elements on the same line, set their display properties to inline block. Okay, let's set the cap and sleeve to inline block. Okay, so we target cap and also we target sleeve and set their display property to inline block. Yeah, now they appear next to each other. So this 60 pixels is for this sleeve, sorry, this cap div, and then another, how many pixels was it, 110 pixels is for this sleeve. So if I were to go on and give it a background of blue, yeah, and so this is the cap div right there. Let's go to the next challenge. In the last project you learned a little bit about borders and the border color property. All HTML elements have borders, though they are usually set to none by default. With CSS you can control all aspects of an element's border and set the border on all sides. So just one side at a time, or just one side at a time. For a border to be visible you need to set its width and style. Okay, let's give some border to our sleeve div. Border left width is going to be 10 pixels. Borders have several styles to choose from. You can make your border a solid line, but you can also use a dashed or dotted line if you prefer. The most commonly used solid border lines are probably the most common. In the dot sleeve CSS rule, add the border left style property with the value solid. Okay, border left style is going to be solid. Yeah, and then our border appears here. I can also make it dashed or dotted. Yeah, but I'm going to go for solid. Your border should be visible now. Yeah, it is visible. If no color is set, black is used by default, but to make your code more readable it's better to set the border color explicitly. Okay, so let's also give a color to our left border. Yeah, nothing is going to change. We are just being explicit about our border color. The border left shorthand property lets you to set the border left border's width, style and color. Okay, so there is this border left shorthand property where I can give it a value in the format width, comma, style, comma, there's no comma necessary, width, style and color. So the width was 10 pixels, style was solid and color was black. And now if I remove, we will still have the same border in here. Your marker is looking good, but to make it look even more realistic, you can change the border style to double solid borders. For the border left shorthand property, change the border style value from solid to double to this, and then there will be two borders, or two border is one border on the left side, but there will be two lines, two vertical lines. The black color of your border looks pretty harsh against the more transparent sleeve. You can use an alpha channel to lower the opacity of the black border. Okay. For the border left shirt hand property, use the RGBA function. Okay, so we are going to use RGBA function here to set the border color value to pure black with 75% opacity. So red is 0, and then opacity is going to be 0.75, not comma, 0.75. Yeah. Your red marker is looking good. Now all you need to do is add the caps and sleeves to your other markers. Okay. Add a cap and sleeve to both the green and blue markers. You can just copy the div elements from the red marker and paste them into other two. Okay, so let's just copy this from here and let's paste them here and here, and we have 3 markers in there. Okay, so we are 90% done. Now let's add some box shadow. Yeah, the last thing you will do is add a slight shadow to each marker to make them look even more realistic. The box shadow property lets you apply one or more shadows around an element. Here is a basic syntax. Okay, so box shadow takes the format or the syntax for this box shadow is offset x, offset y, and color. Both offset x and offset y accept number values in pixels and other CSS units. A positive offset x value moves the shadow right and negative value moves it to the left. A positive offset y value moves the shadow down and a negative value moves it up. So x is for horizontal offset and y is for vertical offset. If you want a value of 0 for any or both offset x and offset y, you don't need to add a unit. Every browser understands that 0 means no change. Alright. The height and the width of the shadow is determined by the height and the width of the element it's applied to. You can also use an optional spread radius value to spread out the reach of the shadow. More on that later. Okay, in the .red CSS rule, add the box shadow property. So here we need to add box shadow with values 5 pixels for offset x, 5 pixels for vertical offset, and red for color. There shouldn't be any comma in between actually. Okay, so now we have the box shadow here. As you can see, you added a simple red shadow around your marker that's 5 pixels to the right and 5 pixels to the 5 pixels down. But what if you wanted to position your shadow on the opposite side? You can do that by using the negative values for offset x and offset y. Okay, so by opposite side I think it means on here. So negative 5, yeah, then negative 5 on the y direction also. Yeah, notice that the edges of the shadow are sharp. This is because there is an optional blur radius value for the box shadow property. Okay, so the blur radius which comes in between offset y and color. If a blur radius value is not included, it defaults to 0. Okay, and the and produces sharp edges. The higher the value of blur radius, the greater the blurring effect is. In the dot green CSS rule and the box shadow property with the values 5 pixels for offset X, 5 pixels for offset Y, 5 pixels for blur radius and green for color. Okay, so let's add a shadow which is almost similar to the previous shadow, but it also has a blur radius. Box shadow, which is going to be 5 pixels horizontal offset, 5 pixels vertical offset, 5 pixels blur radius. Yeah, so that's now it does not have those sharp edges anymore, and green in color. Okay, but what if you wanted to expand the shadow out further? You can do that with the optional spread radius value. Okay, like blur radius, spread radius defaults to 0 if it is not included. Practice by adding 5 pixel shadow directly around the blue marker. What does it mean? Practice by adding a 5 pixel shadow directly around the blue marker. Okay, in the let's go on and modify this. Let's give it a box shadow and so 0 for offset X, 0 for offset Y, 0 for blur radius, but 5 pixels for spread. Okay, and blue for color. Alright, now that you are familiar with the box shadow property, you can finalize the shadows starting with the one for the red marker. Okay, let's finalize. So this is going to be 0 pixels offset X, 0 pixels offset Y, border radius is 20, sorry, blur radius is 20 and spread radius is 0 and color is red. That basically means color is red, so 0 offset, 0 offset, 20 pixels blur radius. Yeah, so now we have the shadow. Zero, 0, 20 pixels and red. Okay, so we were not supposed to use the default value, rather we were supposed to be explicit about our spread radius also. Replace the named color with the RGBA function. Okay, here let's go to RGBA function and red is going to be 83, green 14 and 14. Okay, and 0.8 for alpha value. In the green and blue CSS rules, update the values for the box shadow properties. Okay, green and blue. So let's update 0, 0, blur radius is 20 pixels, spread radius is 0, colors is green and blue. Okay. So let's leave it as it is. Yeah. For the green markers box shadow property, replace the named color with a hex color code. Okay, for this green we are going to make this a hex color with the value of 3B, 7E and 20. and CC for alpha channel. Okay. Finally, for the blue markers box shadow property, replace the named color with HSLA. Okay, HSLA. Then use the values 223, 59%, 31%, and 0.8 for the alpha channel. Yeah, and the confetti is popping. Alright, so I finished the color markers exercise today. Yeah, this much for today.